Welcome to the Miami Book Fair, the 34th edition of the Miami Book Fair. And this is probably more than 34 times you've heard this preamble, so I'll do it quickly. My name's Patrick. I work here at the college, and you're here to hear an amazing quartet of poets who are to my left, so I will get off the stage as quickly as possible. I need to acknowledge our sponsors, which include OHL, the huge construction company that is one of our big sponsors this year, as well as the Knight Foundation, the DeGroote Foundation, and the Batchelor Foundation. And they help make this possible. How many friends of the book fair are in the audience? Yeah, great. Thank you guys very much. And if you're not a friend of the book fair, you should consider this. This is just a wonderful way to contribute to our organization. The book fair continues all year long with amazing authors and other things happening. You got to check the Miami-Dade College website for our cultural affairs and see additional programming that's going to happen all year long. Now, let's see. I'm going to introduce our four poets all at once, and then I'm going to get off stage. They're going to take turns reading, and I'm going to introduce them in reverse order, so the last person I introduce will be the first person speaking. Okay, good. All right. So we have Gerald Stern at the far end. He will be our final speaker. He is the author of 19 poetry collections and has won the National Book Award, the National Jewish Book Award, the Ruth Lilly Prize, the Wallace Stevens Award, the Frost Medal, the Award of Merit from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and he's going to read from his latest collection, Galaxy Love. This is just an amazing group of stellar poets today. Next, we have Paul Muldoon. Paul was hailed by Seamus Heaney, as one of the era's true originals. He's the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning Moist Sand and Gravel. Among his many honors are the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, the Shakespeare Prize for contributions from English-speaking Europe to the European inheritance. He's the Howard G.B. Clark Class of 21 University Professor in the Humanities at Princeton. And I will proceed to our next poet, Jorie Graham. Jorie Graham's the author of numerous collections of poetry, most recently From the New World, Poems 1976 to 2014. She's won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. She's going to read today from Fast, her first new collection in 5 years. And our first poet this morning will be Frank Bidart. He's the author of several collections of poetry, Metaphysical Dog, Watching the Spring Festival, Stardust, Desire, and he's going to read from Half Light, Collected Poems, 1965 to 2016. And with that, I'm going to exit. The poets will all be down. Excuse me, I have to breathe. All of our poets will be down on the first floor for signing after this session. We'll have time for Q&A. Each of them will take about 15 minutes to read their poetry, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Okay? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Frank Bidart. I'm going to read two poems, one longish, one quite short. The first poem is based on a movie called Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. It's not a very good movie. It's a very flawed, rather arty film. But if you've ever had the experience of getting caught by a narrative, even if you don't think the narrative is all that great, nonetheless, you're implicated in it. And that's one of the things this poem is about. It's called He is Ava Gardner. He's Ava Gardner at the height of her beauty in Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. I had allowed him to become for me necessity. I was not ever for him necessity. An adornment, yes, a grace note, not necessity. Everyone, the men at least, are crazy about Pandora. She's smart, self-deprecating, funny. She who has seen seemingly everything about love and says she has no idea what love is, who knows the world finds her beautiful so that she must test every man, and slightly disgusted, find him wanting? Clearly, she is not in this crowd of men eager to please her, to flatter and bring her drinks, found someone who is for her necessity. Watching Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, you feel sympathy for the beautiful who cannot find anyone who is for them necessity. He's Ava Gardner at the height of her beauty. Fucked up. You knew you'd never fall for someone not fucked up. You watch her test each suitor. She sings about love to an old friend, drunk, a poet. He asks her to marry him. After she again refuses, you see him slip something into his drink. Then he dies, poisoned. She says he has tried that too many times. Now she feels nothing. Promising nothing, she asks the famous race car driver, who also wants to marry her, to shove the car he has worked on for months over the cliff into the sea. He does. In the first flush of pleasure, she agrees to marry him. The next day, he has the car's carcass, pouring water, dragged up from the sea. You are the learned, amused professor, surrounded by his collections, who carefully pieces together fragments of Greek pots. You know it is foolish to become another suitor. Hors de combat, soon you're the only one she trusts. You become at moments her confessor. Then she meets the Dutchman. He offers little, asks nothing. When she withdraws her attention, he isn't spooked, because when she meets him, he is painting the portrait of someone who has her face. With petulance, she scrapes off the face. He charmingly makes her head a blank ovoid and says, "That's better." She thinks that she is the knife that cutting him will heal him. You know she is right. You have discovered he is the fabled Dutchman, who for centuries has sailed the world seas unable to die though he wants to die. You know what it is to want to die. His reasons are a little contrived, a mechanism of the plot. Reasons that Pandora at the end discovers. He murdered centuries earlier through jealousy and paranoia his wife. Now, unless he can find a woman willing to die out of love for him, sail out with him and drown, he cannot ever find rest. This logic makes sense to her. She who does not believe in love will perform an act proving its existence. She wants, of course, to throw her life away. The Dutchman will always arrive because that's what she wants. Those of us who look on, who want the proximate and partial to continue, loathe the hunger for the absolute. All your life you have watched as two creatures think they have found in each other necessity. Watched as the shell then closes for a time around them. You envy them as you gather with the rest of the village, staring out to sea. When she swims out to the boat to give herself, both succeed at last in drowning. Couples stay together when each of the two remains a necessity for the other. which you cannot know until they cease to be. Tautology that is the sum of what you know. He is a master. He has lived by becoming the master of the alchemy that makes, as you stare into some one person's eyes, makes you adore him. Eyes that say that despite the enormous landscapes that divide us, you are brothers. He too is trapped in all that divides soul from soul. Then, suddenly he's fluttering his finger ends between yours. He rises from the table, explains he had no sleep last night, and leaves. You couldn't worm your way into becoming for him necessity. When did he grow bored with seduction and confessors and find the Dutchman? For months there has been nothing but silence. When you sent him a pot only you could have with care pieced together from the catastrophe of history. More silence. The enterprise is abandoned. Something there is in me that makes me think I need this thing, that gives this thing the illusion of necessity. As enthralled to flesh as I, he could not see beneath this old face I now wear, this ruinous, ugly body, that I am the Dutchman. But nobody knows when living where necessity lies. Maybe later, if history is lucky, the urn will not refuse to be pieced together. This is neither good nor bad. It is what is. I was preoccupied as I was reading by realizing that I had not turned off my cell phone. And I had better do that, or you were going to stone me for my own cell phone going off. Once at a reading, I was sitting next to the person who was giving the reading, and we were in the first row. And her purse was on the floor next to me. And her cell phone went off. And I reached down to turn it off, and she said, "Frank, just bring me the purse. If you look in my purse, I have to kill you." Okay, one poem, much shorter. For my generation of gay men, the enormous catastrophe, the great tragedy was the AIDS epidemic. And this is a poem about that, about the aftermath of that. It's a poem about survivor's guilt. It's brief. For the AIDS dead. The plague you have thus far survived. They didn't. Nothing that they did in bed that you didn't. Writing a poem, I cleave to you. You means I, one, you, as well as the you inside you constantly talk to. Without justice or logic, without sense, you survived. They didn't. Nothing that they did in bed that you didn't. Thanks. Thank you.
Don't want to embarrass anyone, but Frank did just win the National Book Award.
Yeah.
I think that we should. That wasn't mentioned, so. For his lifetime of work thus far. I'm going to read just a few poems from this, 2 poems from a new book titled Fast. All the poems in it explore some form of the post-human, from the most literal, my father's body dead in front of me, or my attempt to contact him through a medium and succeeding. Bots, 3D printed creatures, the landscape of the planet without us, voices that are not us, perhaps that are those of other species or other elements or other forces. In other words, the idea of what is not human is explored in many different ways. And I'm going to read 2 poems that are short enough to read here. And then I'm going to read 1 new poem. I'll explain why I'm going to do that in a minute. This first poem is titled Ashes. It's my father was cremated. One has to imagine what happens a little bit. There's also our extinction and the imagination of our own potential reincarnation, resurrection, whatever we mean by the cycles that we have always invented for our imaginations in order to bear our mortality. Ashes, manacled to a whelm, asked the plants to give me my small identity. No, the planets, the arcing runners, their orbit entrails waving, and a worm on a leaf, mold, bells, a bower, everything transitioning, unfolding, emptying into a bit more life, cell by cell, in wind like this sound of scribbling on paper. I think I am falling. I remember the earth. Loam sits quietly beneath me, waiting to make of us what it can. Also smoke, waiting to become a new place of origin. The other one phantasmal, trammeled with entry, ever more entry. I spent a lifetime entering. The question of place hanging over me year after year. Me thinning, but almost still here in spirit, far in, far back, behind, privy to insect, bird, fish. Are there nothing but victims? That I could become glass. After that, that we would become glacial melt. Moraine revealing wheatgrass, not grass, a prehistoric frozen mother's caress, or a finger about to touch a quiet skin to run along its dust, a fingernail worrying the edge of air, trawling its antic, perpetually imagined end, leaping, landing at touch, a hand, on whom, a groove traversed where a god dies, and silken before bruised. A universe can die, that we could ever have or be one body, then picked up by the long hair and dragged down through shaft into being one. Now listen for the pines, the bloom, it's glittering, the wild hacking of sea, bend in each stream, eddy of bend. Listen, hear all skins raveling, unending. Hear one skin clamp down upon what now is no longer missing. Here you are, says a voice in the light, the trapped light. Be happy. This is the title poem. The only thing you need to know about this poem, besides the fact that there are bots in it, which I assume everyone in the audience knows what chatterbots are and clever bots, artificial intelligence configured to have kind of a human personality. After I wrote this poem, which I wrote a while back, they made that movie Her, which was sort of a little bit about that, a little bit less. Hi. Can't read if you're taking my picture. Also, the Oracle at Delphi. The Oracle at Delphi was a kind of precursor of the way in which we use data on the internet. The Oracle, obviously the priestess of Apollo, inhaled fumes that came out of the mountain and spoke strings of syllables which people came and interpreted. They had to break the syllables down into phrases, words, sentences, and interpret their fate or the outcome of their request. So that very much the way we interpret the or the truth, the Persians and the Greeks could both get the identical fate and each determine that they in fact were going to be winners in the outcome of their war. It's what you make of it. So she makes a brief appearance, and I don't think there's anything else you need to know here. The title obviously is operating in two different ways. Fast is the title, and the poem begins off of the title. Fast or starve. Too much or not enough. Or nothing else. Nothing else. Too high, too fast, too organized, too invisible. Will we survive, I ask, bot? No. To download bot, be swift. You are too backward, too despotic. To load, greatly enlarge the cycle of labor. To load, abhor labor. Move to the periphery of your body, your city, your planet. To load, degrade, immiserate, be your own deep sleep. To load, use your lips, use them to mouth your oath, chew it, do the dirty thing, sing it, blown off limb or syllable, lick it back on with your mouth. Talk, talk. Who is not terrified is busy begging for water. The rise is fast. The drought comes fast. Mediate, immediate, invent, inspire, infiltrate, instill. Here's the heart of the day, the flower of time. Talk, talk. Disclaimer. Bot uses a growing database of all your conversations to learn how to talk with you. If some of you are also bots, bot can't tell. Disclaimer, you have no secret memories. Talking to Cleverbot may provide companionship. The active ingredient is a question. The active ingredient is entirely natural. Disclaimer, protect your opportunities, your information, informants, whatever you made of time. You have nothing else to give. Active ingredient, why are you shouting? Why? Arctic wind uncontrollable, fetus reporting for duty, fold in the waiting which recognizes you, recognizes the code, The peddler in the street, everyone is calling out. Directive, report for voice. Ready yourself to be buried in voice. It neither ascends nor descends. Inactive ingredient, the monotone. Some are talking now about the pine tree. One assesses its disadvantages. They are discussing it in many languages. Next, they move to roots, branches, buds, pseudo-whorls, candles, active ingredient. They run for their lives, lungs and all. They do not know what to do with their will. Disclaimer, all of your minutes are being flung down. They will never land. You will not be understood. The deleted world spills out jittery as a compass needle with no north. Active ingredient, the imagination of north. Active ingredient, north spreading in all the directions. Disclaimer, there is no restriction to growth. The canary singing in your mind is in mine. Remember, people are less than kind. As a result, Chatterbot is often less than kind. Still, you will find yourself unwilling to stop. Joan will use visual grammetry to provide facial movements. I'm not alone. People come back again and again. We are less kind than we think. There is no restriction to the growth of our cruelty. We will come to the edge of understanding. Like being hurled down the stairs tied to a keyboard, we will go on unwilling to stop. The longest real-world conversation with the bot lasted 11 hours continuous interaction. This bodes well. We are not alone. We are looking to improve. The priestess inhales the fumes. They come from the mountain, here and here. Then she gives you the machine gun run of syllables out of her mouth. Quick, you must make up your answer as you made up your question. Hummingbirds shriek. Bot is amazing, he says. I believe it knows the secrets of the universe. He is more fun to speak with than my actual living friends, she says. Thank you. This is the best thing since me. I just found it yesterday. I love it. I want to marry it. I got so sad when I had to think that the first person who has ever understood me is not even, it turns out, human. Because this is as good as human gets. He just gives it to me straight. I am going to keep him forever. I treated him like a computer, but I was wrong. Whom am I talking to? You talk to me when I am alone. I am alone. Each epoch dreams the one to follow. To dwell is to leave a trace. I am not what I asked for. And finally, this little poem. So I love everybody's work here. If you guys weren't here, it wouldn't matter at all because they're here. It's fantastic. But Jerry Stern's work is just phenomenal. And I used to teach with Jerry at Iowa for many years, and he used to taunt me about a couple of things regarding my poems. And one of the things he told me, which I never forgot, was that I would never be able to write a poem in which I ate a piece of fruit. Because obviously Jerry can write a poem like that in his sleep, okay? And make it spectacular. So although this poem is not going to have any of the rollicking and the sheer fun and imagination and insanity of Jerry's poems, especially, I suggest you just get his, I know he has a new book out, but it's unbelievable. Is it the selected or collected? What is that orange one called? It's a collected, whatever. It's a great book. I never know. We all cheat with those terms now. We want to keep out the bad poems and still call it collected. It's a little bit of a trick. So this is a poem called Tree. And forgive me, I haven't read it before, so. Today on two legs stood and reached to the right spot as I saw it, choosing among the twisting branches and multifaceted changing shades and greens and shades of greens, lobed and lashing sun, the fig that seemed to me the perfect one, the ready one. It is permitted. It is possible. It is actual. The VR glasses are not needed yet. Not for now. No, not for this while. Longer. And it is warm in my cupped palm. And my fingers close round, but not too fast. Somewhere wind like a hammer stroke slows down and lengthens endlessly. Closer in, the bird whose coin toss on a metal tray never stills to one face. Something is preparing to begin again. It is not us. Shh, say the spreading sails of the cicadas as the winch of noon takes hold, and we are wrapped in day and hoisted up, all the ribs of time showing through in the growing, in the lengthening harness of sound, some gnats nearby, a fly where the white milk drop of the torn stem starts. Dust on the eglantine's skin, white powder in the confetti of light all up the branches, truth, sweetness of blood scent and hauled in light, withers of the wild carnival of trees shaking once as the fruit is removed from its dream. Remain, I think, backing away from the trembling into full corrosive sun. Momentary blindness follows. Correction. There are only moments. They hurt. Correction. Must I put down here that this is long ago, that the sky has been invisible for years now, that the ash of our fires has covered the sun, that the fruit is stunted yellow mold when it appears at all, and we have no produce to speak of, no longer exists. All my attention is free for you to use. I can cast farther and farther out before the change, a page turned. We have gone into another story. History floundered, or one day the birds disappeared. The imagination tried to go here when we asked it to, from where I hold the fruit in my right hand, but it would not go. Where is it now? Who is this here where you and I look up, trying to make sense of the normal, turn it to life, more life, disinterred from desire, heaved up onto the dry shore, awaiting the others who could not join us in the end, for good. I want to walk to the left around this tree I have made again. I want to sit under it full of secrecy, insight, immensity, vigor, bursting complexity, swarm. Oh, great forwards and backwards. I never felt my face change into my new face. Where am I facing now? Is the question of good still stinging the open before us with its muggy destination pitched into nothingness? Something expands in you where it wrenches up its bright policing into view. Is this good? Is this the good? Under the celebrating crowd, inside the silences, it forces hard away all round itself, where chanting thins, where we win the war again, made thin by bravery and belief. Here's a Polaroid if you want. Here's a souvenir. Here now for you to watch unfold up close. The fruit is opening. The ribs will widen now. It is all seed, reddish foam, history. Thank you.
Morning, folks. How are you all? I think this morning I'm just going to read 2 or 3 song lyrics, if I may, and just for a little change of tune and tone. I've lain here since mid-October, a glade scented with glade. Just as I've got clean and sober, just as I've got it made. And just as I'm going under, I've watched my life replayed. It's so downbeat, it's a wonder I ever got it made. Only in woodshop and Spanish I got a passing grade. That year my father would vanish. He must have got it made. I joined with Jean-Michel Cabot in the cabinet trade, the tongue and groove of a rabbit. That's how we got it made. That's me in the ruffled collar, the sharp suit and the shades. I look like $1 million. Look like I've got it made. My heart was suddenly aching. Jess was a nurse's aide. Our child was long in the making. Somehow, we got it made. We moved out of that hog wallow at Railroad and Kincaid. Though the rent was hard to swallow, we always got it made. The asbestos-lined 2-roomer, plywood sprayed and resprayed. It all adds up to a tumor. And that's how it got made. The doctor was so soft-spoken, he'd split with Medicaid. It looked like something had broken just as I'd got it made. The coffin maker's plug ugly. There's beauty in his blade. The coffin lid fits so snugly. Looks like he's got it made. So, big twist. It turns out, thank you, it turns out Planet of the Apes is our own planet Earth. The priceless Maltese falcon has virtually no worth. All those statues and statuettes have proved a total sham, though liberty at once seemed set on winning the Grand Slam. You're falling for me. That first day was the first clue I missed, and that you've loved me all along is clearly the big twist. It turns out that in Chinatown, incest gives a fresh slant to a retired Blade Runner's being a replicant. I'd guessed you must be cyberborn till you opened the dam and wept to read a unicorn's last origami gram. The thought I'm secretly your prey is one I've not dismissed. For that you've loved me all along is clearly the big twist. Then there's an instrumental bridge, which I'd like you to imagine. It turns out at the Bates Motel, cross-dressing's the new fad. Princess Leia's look sister, Darth Vader is their dad. A starfighter has the blue book value of your Trans Am. The way you suck that bone, you look more and more like your mam. A galaxy far, far away may be shrouded in mist, but that you've loved me all along is clearly the big twist. So this next one has to do with a series of bands. One of them is a psychobilly band. One or two, you may remember that movement. One of them is a prog rock band, and one of them is a punk band. And it's called Sadie and the Sadists. I joined Sadie and the Sadists in late 76. My hairstyle was part mohawk, part Elvis's cow's lick. It was so punk to get blind drunk on Guinness spiked with gin. Most dangerous, those who'd pierced their nose with a safety pin. We came close to making it with our first LP. Sadie and the Sadists were like family to me. Family. Family. Sadie and the Sadists were like family to me. I joined Clive of India in early 78. It seemed frock coats and ruffles were never out of date. The life of prog had me go the whole hog on the back of Pink Floyd's Pig. Our agent reckoned a song at least 20 minutes long could still be big. And we came close to making it with our third LP, Clive of India. Were like family to me. Family. Family. Yeah. Clive of India were like family to me. Psychobilly and the Orangemen, I joined in 81. The bass I played was upright, a double-barrel shotgun. The bass drum to boot was built to suit by Loudons of Lambeg. Things are never dull when you have a skull tattooed on your middle leg. We came close to making it with our fifth LP. Psychobilly and the Orangemen were like family to me. Family. Family. Yep. Psychobilly and the Orangemen were like family to me. Thank you.
I guess I'll read sitting down, since here I am. Can you hear me? I'm going to read 6 or 7 poems from my most recent book called Galaxy Love. I'll start with the title poem called Galaxy Love. These are short poems. There's too little time left to measure the space between us, for that was long ago, that time. So just lie under the dark blue quilt and put the fat pillows with the blue slips on the great windowsill so we can look over them and down to the small figures hurrying by in total silence and think of the heat up here and the cold down there while I turn the light off with the right hand and gather you in close with the wrong. A poem called Blue Particles. Don't ever think of Coney Island, where the rabbits once ran wild, or the afternoon we went swimming, though it was only May, for we had graduated. And we spent the night eating hot dogs at Nathan's and took the Screamer back to 96th Street. Nor should you love too much the White Pole or the long and noisy ride through Brooklyn, the number 2 that delivered you to your front door, and the Dutch freighter that delivered you to Antwerp, then the Gare du Nord. Nor your stubbornness every morning at the small table, and what it was like to walk out into the sunlight, and how the blue particles were your chief influence. That and the book of Isaiah, and King Lear rolling in the dirt on Chalk Mountain, the early part of your life. Here's a poem for Easter called Today is Easter. Today it's Easter and there are black flags over all the porches. Down the street, someone put up an American flag. He thought it was the 4th of July. My favorite stores are closed. Everyone's at the funeral. In Disneytown, there's a church that looks a lot like St. Peter's, and there's a new pope there, a woman named Frances. In the days of Pius, her name was Billy. She is giving a sermon to 900,000 people in the sunshine. Eat what you kill what you eat, love what you kill. I forget. I can't find a black flag, for I'm no longer an anarchist. I'm a liberal, radical, East Coast, socialist, prophet-adoring, Debs-loving Yid like him. This is a poem called Midrash. Raise your hand if you know what Midrash is. Midrashim. 50. This is based on an absurd myth about a Nazi soldier, German soldier, at a concentration camp who wanted to sacrifice himself instead of the women who are about to be gassed. It's a common, revisionist myth. The women knew the Lord was busy arguing with the bearded ones in the study house, nor would he ever whisper in a poet's ear, all is good despite everything. Not that God. I don't know if the Goyim know that Jews put him on trial, then dragged him in chains. Well, the Pope said, at least they dragged something in, but spitting was going too far. They wouldn't spit on him, not that God. And as far as the myth of the good Nazi is concerned, they weren't singing, but praying. Nor would a Nazi guard ever think of taking the place of a woman. What, all of them? One of them? He alone? Nazis are basically good? They take pity on vermin? Here's a dead rat with his mouth eaten away. Kiss it. Okay, a poem called Lips. When I was in junior high school, my music teacher, Ms. Steiner, gave me the French horn to play, but my lips were too thick to make any sound come out of it. So she compromised and gave me a trombone, which I played for a couple of years until the neighbors signed a petition. It's called Lips. Sitting with his friends, he learned how shameful it was to have played the golden trombone and not the wooden flute, and to have blasted his own way into manhood that way, instead of making a soft sound with his mouth and fingers. But he was stubborn, and anyhow, he had thick lips, which stood him in good stead in one case, but not the other. And furthermore, his friends had died, 1, 2, 3, one after another, and he was left to his own devices. I would say his own instruments. He could have considered a harp, or in his case, a lyre, and found a tall stool to display his wares. I haven't forgotten that, for he wasn't finally restricted to one thing. Indeed, a mouth organ, if push came to shove, something he could almost swallow for the drama's sake. Think of him getting rid of spit and warming up behind the French horns he hated beyond anything for their thin lips and their benevolent sounds. How are we doing? Let's see. Lips. There's a poem called Thieves and Murderers, page 88. Thieves and murderers. In various European countries, if you could read Latin, and even if you committed murder, you could be forgiven. I don't think that's true in the United States. That was when I was reading Villon and fell in love forever with thieves and murderers, so long as they could rhyme in Latin and French. But not long after, forever, I changed it again, though I didn't want to become too Eisenhower-ish. He who fell under the desk at the first sign of a bomb. He who made love to his driver, and as I remember was scolded by George Marshall, and a little later made his maiden speech at Columbia, where he was being prepared. For what's good for Raisin Bran is good for America. Days on end, I watched Orson Welles and his company rehearse Macbeth in a small French church somewhere on the other bank, which stood him in good stead after he returned to the land of his fathers, my uncles. I was back to Thieves and Murderers then, where there were strings galore and odes and dirges on the first and second floor. Old PA 611, where the flying fishes play, and the dawn comes up like thunder out of China across the bay. Kipling. A slightly longer poem called Hamlet Naked. this is a celebration in a in a in a way of 42nd Street before it became Disney World, where you go to the movies at 11 o'clock in the morning, and you could spend the whole day there if you could stand the smell of urine. And it's sort of celebrates a walk across New York City, ending up in the East Village, now called. It was it was really a version of Hamlet where the actors were naked, literally naked. It was a theater west on 47th that smelled inside of urine, both upstairs and down. You wouldn't believe it, but it was Hamlet naked, not Lear, not Love. Next door to where 10 or so men were facing the walls and swaying in what was called a bookstore. Across the street from Nedick's, orange soda and hot dogs, for which I'll say just this, that some could bend their knees while swaying and move their lips and shut their books with a loud amen. When I walked east past Broadway, I hesitated too long, and by this act, I had to press the button twice to change the red to green, for I was in a fog, and someone should light a bonfire, since I could walk wherever I wanted then and didn't know north from south or east from west, nor was it Pap, his Hamlet, circa 1968, nor Dante naked, nor Faust. It was instead your normal lewdness, posing in a half-hearted way as art. Excuse me. Posing in a half-hearted way as art. I was ironic then as I am now, but my head was too far down, as if I were looking for nickels, though anything less than a quarter, I wouldn't disgrace myself. Maybe I was looking at the metal doors open to let the light down into the cellar, Gregory Corso playing the harmonica, Diana trilling with a toy cello. Both I saw one day on Avenue A among the bags of rice and the boxes of lettuce, the old Ukrainian restaurant, which this late date could be an expensive Armenian or Ethiopian diner sucking it up with chunks of bread. For there is nothing but improvement now among the littered streets. And there was a learned couple with a 5-year-old. All three had matching neckties. I want to wear one when I go into the cellar. I want to be arrested for causing havoc, especially when a crowd gathers around the opening. In New York, a crowd can form in a second. Think of Gregory, a blue jay on his head. Think of Diana, seeing a live rat. Think of me lying on the gunny sacks, my left arm up, conducting. So I'll read one more poem. This is called Larry. And it's in memory of Larry Levis, the great poet, who I've written a large number of poems for. He was in Utah at this point, married, living in a small house with a huge motorcycle in it that practically took up the whole first floor. And I call it a hog. He kept a hog in Utah as big as an old bathroom and parked it in his parlor so he could polish one bristle at a time. And he kept a horse in his heart, a capacious meadow surrounding him, the one with a holy ankle, nor did he forget the bruised jockey. And he missed my war, though he had a good one of his own for which he wrote the best poem known of the alphabetized corpses, and suffered Ike only as a boy, and never took the ride to Set on a French bicycle, and staggered back home in the French moonlight. I had the great honor of introducing him to New Orleans and watching him jump with joy, oh, literally, as we visited Hebrew Rest for Sorrow and the caves on Bourbon for cold beer. And we both loved the same woman years apart, and it was I who called her up to give her the bad news, to which she said, now I'm going upstairs to read every word he ever wrote. Thank you. I guess we have time for questions.
If this is on? There is. So if you have a question, I'll bring a microphone to you. We've got 10 minutes or so, and then they'll be down in the autographing section and down the escalator to the left.
Can you talk about your experiences with having your texts set to music? And what do you think about contemporary song lyrics?
Who's the question directed
Who's
to?
it directed? And he says all of you.
You go ahead.
Is that to all of us? Yes. No, I have nothing to say about that. I mean, I think Paul has a lot to say.
I'm not sure if I have a lot to say about it, but I'm very interested in the song lyric, as you might have deduced, and so I do try to write songs for various composers, and I enjoy seeing what happens when they bring their gifts, talents to the words. And something interesting, I think, pretty much always happens. And sorry, I wasn't sure if it was directed to me. What was the question again?
It was about how do you feel about the song?
How do I feel about it? I feel great about it. I feel great about poetry and all its manifestations. Anytime I see a poem coming down the road, it makes me very happy, in whichever guise it might be. So, does that make sense? Yeah. You want to say anything about that?
Well, I'll say a couple words about it. Of course, when poetry was oral music, we were taught, before it became written down, poems were an integral part of music. Of course, poems now have their own music. Don't forget that. But they were accompanied by instruments, and the lyre, L-Y-R-E, was a critical instrument in this venture. I have two people writing music now for poems of mine, and one is a cello, one uses a cello, and the other a flute. I have mixed feelings about it. I think the way we write now, as I say, we have our own music, unless you're deliberately writing songs. So these are some things to think about. Okay, is there another question?
I got one for
In this modern age of technology, what is the use of poems to create truth and knowledge? How does it relate to tech?
It doesn't. It resists. There's a wonderful little book I was going to recommend, a couple of books that, since we're at a book fair and you might find them here, that I found astonishing this year. One is Fantasyland by Kurt Anderson. The other is this little book called On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. quite a few other interesting nonfiction books besides all the interesting poetry books. This little book just has 20 little dictums that it expounds upon. So number 9 is be kind to our language, just so that you know. Number 1 has been do not obey in advance. Number 2 has been defend institutions. Number 3 has been beware of the one-party state. Number 4 has been take responsibility for the face of the world. Number 5 has been remember professional ethics. 6, be wary of paramilitaries. So that by the time you get to number 7, be reflective if you must be armed. Number 8 is stand out. So number 9 is be kind to our language. Avoid pronouncing the phrases everyone else does. Think up your own way of speaking, even if only to convey that thing you think everyone is saying. Make an effort to separate yourself from the internet. Read books. And number 10, believe in truth. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power because there is no basis upon which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. The biggest wallet pays for the most blinding lights. And On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, I believe Joe Biden was quoting from it this morning, I was told, when he spoke, and it's an extraordinary book, and also Fantasyland. So I believe that we're going to have to learn how to live without all of the technology, simply because the one weapon that we know is really, really ready to be deployed against us is one which would completely interrupt not only all of our computer circuitry, all of the internet, but all of our electrical circuits, and it would fry them, and that wouldn't be interrupted in such a way that could be restored. It would have to be like rebuilt from scratch. You have to imagine that when the New York Times describes this after hearings in the Senate, explaining that this particular bomb is the actual bomb that's being built with the assistance of Russians and Chinese in North Korea, and the Senate knows it. It's a thing that detonates 30 miles up in the air and which just basically shuts everybody down. Then you have to figure out how do you get water? I mean, the examples people give is how do you get cash out of the cash machine? How do you fly an airplane? How do you use a bridge? But actually, how do you get your water? People talk about the refrigerators won't work anymore. I think what we should be learning is how to tell the difference between a geranium seed and a wheat seed. I think we should be teaching our children how to tell the difference between a wheat seed that needs a lot of water and one that can grow in drought. I think we should be learning, people who are still alive, who know these techniques, should be teaching our children how to use birch wands in order to figure out where water is. It's a perfectly real skill. I've seen it done in many countries, and people could find water where there otherwise might not be some. We should probably be learning how to can. So to me, I'm very sure that poetry will be one of the things that people can have under those conditions, which will not only give solace, it will give wisdom, it will give information, it will transmit to the future who we are, who we have been, and who we might still be. I'm really not that interested in what the chips are going to do to us.
I've got a question for you. Anyone, doesn't matter. What personal lesson has poetry taught you? And maybe on a more literary, not literary sense,
I
but
can't hear you.
what personal lesson has poetry taught you? What personal lesson has poetry taught you? And how do you determine when your poem is done?
Is that for me?
That's for you. And for you.
The first part of your question, what personal lesson has poetry taught me? And what's the second part?
How do you know when your poem is done? How do you know when a poem is
I
done?
can't hear that.
How do you know when your poem is
How do you
done?
know when a poem is done?
How do I know when a poem is done? When I've reached the bottom of the page. Um, I guess I started writing poetry, I think, when I was 14. My first poem was an attack on Mother's Day. I still remember the lines. I got up early on a Mother's Day and sat at this old secretary that we had. And I remember the first lines of the poem. And I'll recite them to you. On Mother's Day and Father's Day, it is the custom now to harbor deeds of reverence that rival the kowtow. So it's kind of a sprung rhythm, a la Gerard Manley Hopkins. I didn't know that. I carefully wrote the poem out, gave it to my mother, and she started to cry, not with joy at the poem. And my father said to me, "Hey, kid, couldn't you have gotten her a gift?" And then that was the beginning of a life of patience, constant interpretation of what friends and enemies of poetry said, being on a plane and when someone, asks you, "What do you do?" I'd say, "I'm a writer." After a while, I confessed to being a poet. That generally stumps people and stops them. I realize that I'm a kind of an alien, and there are things I have to keep to myself. And I think that's probably true of all of us. And it's kind of weird that so many of us, or so few of us, as the case may be, get recognition for the distance we keep and the originality we express. That's all I got to say about that now. The second part, I never, I was kidding about the end of the page, although sometimes that is the case. I like most of us, I start on the back of an envelope. I write with a pencil or a pen, and I don't use a computer to write with. I have nothing against it, but I'm not good at it. And the poem directs me. It's the poem itself that is a master, and not me. The poem speaks to me. It informs myself. It says, "We're finished now." And I'm very obedient.
And it's for that reason that actually the other virtue as well as patience that one might learn is humility before the poem. That's what we sometimes forget about that, I suppose, but that's the key, one of the key ideas, I think. But guys, may I humbly suggest that I think we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming here.